No quick kid in my bed, I can't have that. I want that long neck, not talking giraffe neck. Ain't no laying down, man, we bout to have lay fun. I'm about to make your balls stick up like space buns. Want your soak? Place it down my throat. Tongue tickle your but not telling a joke.
Birchum woke up 5 minutes before the alarm was set to go off. He'd been doing that a lot lately. With a sharp inhale, he sat up and looked down at his wife. Wendy always slept like the dead. She was in her late 30s, fine lines forming around her face, denoting her maturity. Yet, she was still beautiful. Her full lips quivered and her eyes twitched. Richard hoped whatever dream she was having was better than their reality. As he stared at her, he could feel resentment, brackish and sickly and hot like tar, bubble up inside. Wendy had never been anything less than kind and supportive since the day they met. She loved him deeply, and he loved her. Yet, he was aware his love was different than hers. The spark of love and lust was still very present. She was as romantic and sexual as when they'd first met, when Jeannie was still in diapers. Birchum imagined that most men would long for a wife like that. Yet, he found it stifling. Her affection, her voice, her wants and desires, they felt like a noose that as the day went on would slowly constrict, leaving him dead by the time the sun went down. Wendy was a good woman. She didn't deserve him. She didn't deserve his apathy, his physical disinterest in her. She always insisted that he saved her life after her previous marriage fell apart. In his younger days, that made him well up with pride. Now, it made him queasy. No, he didn't save her from anything. Why the hell did she see so much in him? Why did she put up with him? Why did she care? His thoughts were obliterated by the alarm going off. A growl rumbled in his throat as he turned it off and got ready for the day. Some of his negative thoughts were dulled by the scent of the fresh coffee he poured into his favorite mug. It had the phrase, "I love wood," printed on it. It was a gag gift from his friend, Don, who thought it was peak comedy. Birchum just liked it because it held a lot of liquid. He felt a cold nose on his palm. The family dog, Sawbuck, nudged his hand and danced to be let outside. As Birchum kept a close eye on the chocolate lap, the front door to a house down the street opened. Out stepped Elliot Carponzi, dressed in a pink bathrobe and matching slippers, his ginger hair in a messy bun, his beard smooshed at one side from sleep. He stood with a cup of that disgusting floral tea he always brewed in the teacher's lounge and watched as his own dog, a prissy ankle biter, went out to do its business. The dog had a pink collar and a little tinkly bell, though whether that indicated it was female was anyone's guess. To Birchum's dismay, instead of staying in the yard, Sawbuck ran over to greet Elliot's dog. They sniffed a moment before starting to play, Elliot's dog unfazed by the comparatively massive size of Sawbuck. Figures. Birchum can't stand Carponzi, yet their dogs like each other. That seemed to be a running theme. Everyone liked Carponzi. He'd caught Wendy chatting with him and swapping gardening tips, and Jeannie had insisted he was a nice guy. She'd signed up for a role in the play he'd written for the school to perform, Romeo and Romeo. Jeannie landed the part of one of the Romeos. She was excited to play a gender non-conforming person. Too excited. She insisted Elliot was nothing but kind to her and the other kids. He'd experienced it himself. The students, the fat, the non-white, the queer, they all seemed to appreciate him and what he did to represent them. Birchum, Don, and Principal Bortle seemed to be the only ones dissatisfied with his presence. Elliot greeted Sawbuck and began to pet him, squishing his face and speaking to him in a baby talk voice. Birchum hoped that Sawbuck, a dog of refined taste, would snap at him for such an insult, but instead he rolled over for belly rubs. "Dumb dog," he muttered before calling him back inside. Sawbuck sauntered home, reluctantly. Their eyes met, and as much as they opposed each other on a daily basis, Carponzi was still nice to Birchum. God only knew why. Carponzi waved, and Birchum merely nodded in reply. Birchum's morning was going to plan. He exited the home, a buzz of caffeine in his veins, suitcase in hands, ready for another day of mutual hatred between himself and his preteen students. He turned the ignition key to his beloved car, and the engine made a loud and unhealthy noise before going silent. A foul scent drifted in through the vents. He began turning the key over and over as though that would magically fix things. The engine remained silent. Birchum took it in stride. He threw his keys to the floor, pounded the steering wheel, and bellowed like a wounded gorilla. Knuckles rapped the driver's side window. Birchum's blood boiled a few degrees hotter. He cracked the door open and snapped, "What do you want, Carponzi?" "I was in my garden this morning watering when I heard you yelling. Are you okay?" "Car troubles. I'm fine." Carponzi was thoroughly unconvinced. Birchum let out a deep snarl. "Fuck this car, piece of shit, I'm screwed! Wendy needs her car for work. Can't borrow Eddie's car, cause he doesn't have a car, cause he's obsessed with his fucking video games." Carponzi raised a hand and cut Birchum off. "Don't worry, I'll drive you." Birchum blinked. "What? No." "I insist. It's a 30-minute drive. Not as though you can walk." "I'll call in. Sure, those little rodents will love having a substitute for the day." Carponzi crossed his arms and gave Birchum a stern look. "I don't have much choice in the matter, do I?" Carponzi shook his head. The first few minutes of the drive were agony. Birchum gripped the handle of his suitcase so hard his knuckles turned white. It was deathly silent. Every now and then Carponzi would glance over and give a polite smile that was never returned. "You can turn the radio on if you want," he offered. Birchum sighed. "Why are you doing this?" "Why am I doing what? Why are you helping me? Figured you wouldn't want someone as toxically masculine as me in your little safe space." "Not what safe space is," Carponzi muttered. "I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do. You're my neighbor and colleague. When you have the opportunity to help people, you should take it. Even if you hate them?" "I don't hate you, Richard." "Could have fooled me." Carponzi's calm demeanor faltered a little. "Please tell me you're not still hung up on that safety film. Blood on the bandsaw? Yeah, I'm hung up still. Banning a safety film because it's brutally honest about what happens when you're an idiot around dangerous machinery? I was not that fragile when I was a kid. I don't want to argue about this anymore. Please. I think the film is too unnecessarily gory. That's all. I'm not trying to be your enemy. I'm trying to do what's best for your students by holding their hands because they're too scared to acknowledge that life is hard. Life is pain. Just because pain is a part of life doesn't mean we shouldn't try to circumvent it when possible." Birchum rolled his eyes. "Christ, Elliot, you want to sugarcoat everything." The following pause made Birchum feel slightly elated. He actually gotten the lib to shut up for once. "Richard, you always talk about your day when you were a kid. Tell me about it." Birchum snorted. "Why?" "Because I'm curious. The way you describe your childhood, it was very different from mine." "Trying to pick apart my past, huh? Explain how toxic and shitty it really was and how it makes me a bad person?" "No, I'm just trying to understand." There was a moment of silence. "It would be with your consent, of course. I would never force you to get into anything you don't want to." Birchum chuckled bitterly. "You know, you remind me so much of my mother. She was just like you, a hippie. She bought into all that peace and love bullshit. My father was a good old boy, and she couldn't handle it. Couldn't stand to be with a real man. She always insisted I be a social worker, an activist, or some shit. I showed interest in construction, wanted to build things, and she wanted to burn me like a Salem witch. Construction workers are sexist pigs. How dare men want a cold beer and time with a woman after a hard day of work?" "I take it she was less than enthused with your line of work?" "As far as I know, I'm dead to her. Got remarried after I joined the Navy. Started a whole new family with a whole new man, and as far as I know, she's doing better now than she ever did with me. I hope her cookie-cutter little gremlins give her the happiness I never could." It was at that moment Birchum realized how much venom was going into his rant, and he noticed the slight discomfort present on Elliot's face. "Needless to say, I found more value from my coach than I did her," he said, forcing calmness back into his voice. "He understood what made a man. I was a measly little butterball when I first met him in elementary school, and by the time I left high school, I was fit and active and ready for manhood. I owe everything to that bastard." "Bastard?" Carponzi said, eyebrow raised. "Oh, he was a bastard. Untouchable, unlovable, unlikable. But he was that way for a reason. He was hard because that's what boys need to become men. Otherwise they turn out like you." Richard couldn't hide the little smile that curled in the corner of his mouth. There was a little elation in his gut. He wanted to see Carponzi's reaction, his rage, his hurt, his sorrow, something, anything. Instead, Elliot merely huffed. Not an angry huff, a pitiable huff. "I'm sorry that's what you were taught to believe." He was quiet after that, and Birchum found himself irritated. Pity? How could this hipster weasel give him pity like that? Birchum didn't want his pity. He didn't want to be coddled. He crossed his arms and stared out the window, grinding his teeth for the remainder of the ride. "You're kidding me," Birchum murmured. Don shook his head. "Nope. The engine's fried." He tapped his wrench against the car's engine. "I'm surprised your jalopy lasted this long. I've been telling you need a new car for a while now, but no." "So that's it? The car's done for?" "Yes," Don said bluntly. "You need a whole new engine, and frankly, that would cost more than this bucket of scrap is even worth. I've had this car for 20 years, and you expect me to just send it to the scrapyard? Get some new thing with a billion useless features and sensors that break at a moment's notice?" Don shrugged. "Look, I feel ya, but I have one of those newfangled cars, and they're quite nice. Man up. Get a new car." Birchum stared at the dead weight that just yesterday had been his old dependable car. "And you expect me to afford a new car how exactly? I'm sure you have some savings." "No. No cash set aside for emergencies?" "Not a cent." Don grimaced. "Okay, new may not be the way to go, so used. In my experience, it's still a few thousand." Birchum rubbed his temples. "You're in a bunch of car circles. Surely you and your monkey wrench buddies have fixed up junkers for a decent price, right?" Don placed a hand on Birchum's shoulder. "I'll put feelers out. I promise I'll hook you up with something." "Good. In the meantime, I'll need you to drive me to work. Dick, I love you, buddy, but I'm not going 20 minutes out of my way to pick you up every morning." Birchum's heart sank. "Oh god, you're not honestly saying..." Don grinned. "I'm sure our resident Jedi would love to carpool with you for the time being." carpooling. Birchum proceeded to swear profusely and kick the sides of the car with his steel-toed boots as Don cackled. Despite everything, Carponzi was perfectly amenable to the idea of carpooling when Richard explained his situation the next morning. Carponzi's response was to make a puppy dog face and go, "Aw, I'm sorry," in a somewhat effeminate way. Those concerned eyes and calm voice made Birchum's temper flare up as much of Carponzi's behavior did. Strangely enough, it wasn't because he found it annoying, but because some part of him found it almost cute. It was sweet in the same way that Wendy was, yet coming from Carponzi it hit differently. Men aren't supposed to be sweet. Men are smoky and tough like a hearty steak. They're not supposed to make Birchum feel like this. Carponzi's words of reassurance that he'd help Birchum for as long as needed was so genuine and so kind it made him want to throw up. How could he be okay with this arrangement as though Birchum hadn't insulted him the day prior? It occurred to him that Carponzi had taken that insult in stride, chosen to ignore it, and move on. The mark of a real man, despite him being not that. Birchum excused himself from the conversation and returned home. He met Wendy at the front door. She waved to Carponzi over her husband's shoulder. "What are you doing up?" Birchum asked, gruffly. Admittedly, he enjoyed being the only one awake this early. "Couldn't sleep. Wanted to see my sweet boy." She squatted down and hugged Sawbuck, whose tail wagged profusely as he pressed his body to her torso. "So, did he say yes?" Birchum nodded. "That's very nice of him. Very neighborly." "Uh-huh." Wendy stood and hugged Birchum from behind. "Be nice," Birchum grumbled in response. "Who knows, maybe this is the opportunity for you two to finally get along." "Not happening." "He's a nice guy," she insisted, with Birchum grumbling more in reply. She turned him around by the shoulders and gave him a stern look. "Sweetheart, please, try to be a bit nicer to him. I know you don't see eye to eye on everything." "He's a blood-sucking lib, Wen," Birchum insisted, reprimanding himself for the childish whine in his voice. "I hate him. Just try it. For me. If you really can't stand it, if you really can't make it work, I can twist Dina's arm into driving me to work so you can take my car." Birchum could tell by the look on her face that while this was something she was offering, she wasn't thrilled at the idea. "Okay," he relented. The two sat in silence for the first 10 minutes or so of the commute. Birchum tapped his fingers restlessly against his suitcase. He looked over at Carponzi, who was lightly humming something. He sighed. "What's the song?" "What are you humming?" Birchum clarified. "Oh, Duel of the Fates. Sounds classical." "Sort of. It's from Star Wars, The Phantom Menace." Birchum huffed. "Oh yeah, I saw that when it came out. Practically a different movie. Didn't look a thing like Star Wars. Prequel hater, huh?" "You would like them, wouldn't you?" "There are things to love about them, though I agree they're messy. The first 3 movies, they had that grungy feeling. Everything looked like a workshop. Felt lived in, you know? Hated how slick everything in the prequels looked." The two continued to go back and forth about Star Wars. Carponzi seemed well-versed in the franchise. The way he talked about the prequels, it's as though the two of them watched very different films. Granted, Birchum had only seen the first movie in theaters when he was 15 and caught the rest in bits and pieces on cable. Carponzi apparently saw so many themes, so much story, so much characterization in something Birchum saw as little more than bored actors delivering boring dialogue intercut with flashy effects. Their conversation drifted to other blockbusters, which drifted to general nostalgia. Carponzi was about 10 years younger than Birchum, so the things he grew up with and were intimate to him were things Birchum barely remembered. Still, he admitted it was nice to reminisce with someone who'd lived during that time period. It took a while, but Birchum realized that he and Carponzi were just talking. Normally. Their conversations at work were strained and almost always about some new ism that needed to be avoided. But here, now, Carponzi was just a normal person. An effeminate nerd, but normal. Birchum always interpreted him as this insufferable know-it-all with leftist ideals upon his lips. He'd never given much thought to the person underneath. Just as Birchum realized he was almost enjoying Carponzi's company, he felt darkness creep in. No, this was wrong, surely. Carponzi stands against everything he believes in. What is he even doing, sitting here getting chummy as though they're friends and not two men who completely oppose each other? Birchum went quiet, which Carponzi seemed confused by. He caught him giving quick glances out of the corner of his eye. Birchum's stomach twisted. Carponzi was afraid he'd said something wrong. Birchum's mind screamed. Just yesterday he was mocking this lib, and now today he feels... what? Sorry for him? He felt his cheeks flush as those contradicting feelings battled each other like kaiju for the rest of the ride. The confusing feelings would remain as the week went on. Carponzi was a very chatty man, and despite Birchum attempting to avoid conversation, he always found himself sucked in. He was shocked to find that Carponzi liked sports. He never assumed someone like him would ever enjoy or play sports, but he did both. Apparently, he was on a football team several years ago. He saw it more as a hobby than anything serious. He had to put it on hold because of his job as Jedi, a thankless position that sucked up a lot of time, but paid so poorly he needed a side job as a customer service rep at U-Tool to stay afloat. Birchum gave Carponzi condolences for working for a company that sold tools that were as overly produced as they were cheap. Carponzi said he was having trouble learning the machinery. He was looking to create a custom desk for his PC setup and admitted he had no idea what he was doing. Drop by the house. Wendy always has a pitcher of homemade lemonade in the fridge. I can help you out. As soon as the statement escaped his lips, Birchum was shocked. It had been a passing intrusive thought. Had he really been so stupid as to offer something like that? Carponzi smiled and said he'd love the help. Their eyes met and Birchum's stomach lurched. Carponzi had the prettiest blue eyes. His smile was charming and boyish, youthful despite his prime having gone by several years. The sun had just started peeking over the horizon and the light hit his hair in a way that made the ginger glow like embers. Birchum always thought red was the most attractive hair color. Birchum realized that there was something brewing in his chest, a gooey, fluttery, saccharine feeling twinged with excitement at the sight of Carponzi and the thought of spending more time with him off school grounds. It was both exhilarating and absolutely terrifying. That same day, in between periods, Birchum found himself chatting with Carponzi in the break room. They'd had a disagreement about some new microaggression Birchum had made. He'd referred to sitting cross-legged as Indian style, and Carponzi had politely explained what the issue actually was and how crisscross was a better term to use. And for the first time, it didn't make Birchum angry. His knee-jerk reaction wasn't to tune out and ignore everything said. He let the words in, considered what Carponzi was actually saying, and agreed the issue was minor, but that Carponzi had a point. Don, who was standing in the background, snipped, saying that Carponzi was being ridiculous. He clearly expected Birchum to join in and give some little rant. Don raised an eyebrow and seemed genuinely taken aback when his friend didn't. The conversation shifted, and the two continued conversing casually. Carponzi even managed to make Birchum chuckle. Don had a confused frown as he sipped his coffee, leaned against the counter. Saturday morning, Birchum was in the garage, waiting when Carponzi entered, rapping his knuckles against the wall. "Hi," he said, chipperly. He held out a pan covered in tinfoil. "I brought a casserole, Grandma's recipe. Wanted to pay you back somehow, what with you taking time out of your weekend for me." Thanks, Birchum said, unable to hide the awkwardness from his voice. Carponzi was wearing a pair of ratty jeans and a white hoodie with a pride flag on it. Carponzi could sense Birchum staring a little and his face flushed. "I don't have that many junky shirts. Figured we'd be getting dirty. I would have worn something else," but Birchum could sense Carponzi's discomfort and said, "You thought a pride flag would get me worked up." "Yeah, that fearful expression. Oh God, that face." That was the same face Birchum had worn over the years when looking at himself in the mirror, worrying how he came across, how others would think of him. Face he was unable to keep at bay when certain forbidden thoughts would emerge from deep down and make their presence known. Birchum's heart pounded and he felt sick to his stomach. How many times had Carponzi made that face during their spats? How many times had he not noticed or in some awful way reveled in it? I'm sorry, Birchum said. It was the only thing he could get out. Thank God Carponzi made the moment end by asking where the fridge was so he could keep the casserole cold. They spent the day working on the desk. Birchum's garage was a wasteland of scrap wood and roadside furniture finds he snagged to upcycle. Between the two of them, they'd figured out exactly what Carponzi was looking for in a desk, and he'd made blueprints. When taking breaks, the two would sip Wendy's lemonade, eat Elliot's casserole, and chat. The tension had, thankfully, dissolved. Birchum's eyes kept drifting to the pride flag on Carponzi's chest. They'd been having an unrelated conversation, but Birchum rather abruptly changed the subject, unable to stand his curiosity anymore. "So are you gay?" Carponzi snorted and grinned. "What was it that tipped you off? This shirt, my Unity t-shirt, or the license plate on my scooter?" It said aloud. Birchum realized how stupid he sounded. "But yes, I am." "Why?" Birchum tilted his empty glass back and forth, the ice clinking against the sides. "How did you know, exactly?" Carponzi gave Birchum an incredulous look. "I was never attracted to women. It's pretty straightforward, actually. Though, coming to terms with it can be hard due to little representation in culture, lack of education, and patriarchy insisting that gay traits make you unmanly." That last part was like an ice pick. "So you had to deal with that growing up?" "Me? Luckily not too much. I liked sports and playing outside and getting dirty and all the gross boy things, but I also liked dressing in my mom's clothing, playing with Barbie dolls, and preferred the company of girls over boys. Even before I had a word for it, I'm sure they knew. They never shamed me, but the other kids, their parents, that was a different story." Carponzi's eyes seemed distant. "Sorry, I asked." Oh, no, don't be. I'm open about it. It is what it is. My history, it's why I became a Jedi. I want to make sure that no kid has to go through what I did. I want them educated, and I want them safe. If it weren't for my parents, I'd have been eaten alive as a child, and there are plenty of people like me who don't have that support at home. Did you ever hate yourself? Birchum's jovial feelings were completely gone. All of Carponzi's talk of queer representation, identity, and so on just washed over him before. He effectively blocked it out, but now that he's actually taking the time to listen, letting those thoughts and ideas trickle in, suddenly many things about himself fell into place. He was absolutely terrified of the implications. Sometimes, Carponzi admitted, but it never lasted. Like I say, I had support. Birchum tried to picture Carponzi's parents. He imagined a couple of clean-cut gingers in tacky 70s-style clothes, their arms around a small ginger boy, hugging him tightly, and that image rolled over to his own experiences. He remembered his mother. She always had a martini in her hand and was always giving him a disapproving look. No grade was ever good enough, no interest to her liking, never a friend who was a good influence, never a girl she approved of. She would always say that he had poor taste, that he was failing her, never himself. Her. He remembered that coach, how much contempt he held for Birchum, how hateful he was, how Birchum's mere existence was bothersome. He remembered how aggressively straight all his Navy buddies were, how Don teased Birchum for flirting with that guy on the Homes for Humanity site and gifted him that stupid fucking mug. He remembered the first time he ever felt sexual attraction, and it was certainly not for any of the girls. He remembered the embarrassment of being elated at the sight of his fellow Navymen half-dressed in close quarters. That man at the job site had been attractive, and now Birchum stood there. All of these memories and experiences and feelings hitting like the meteorite that killed the dinosaurs, the only anchor to any sort of reality being Carponzi's face. His sweet, kind, handsome, beautiful face. His heart pounded, chest tight, throat dry. "Are you okay?" Carponzi asked. "You look off." "I'm fine," Birchum said gruffly. With that, he got back to work on the desk, forcing everything out of his mind, replacing with the cold, calculated thoughts of constructing this desk. He had the measurements and math in his head. He had a plan. Everything made sense. Nothing was up to interpretation. Nothing was complicated. Everything was orderly. Math, wood, and saw blades were not emotional. The sun was starting to set when the two decided to break. They had the basic frame of the desk finished. Birchum had been quiet, only responding to Carponzi when he said something, not going out of his way to give more thoughts. He decided to call it when he received a call from Wendy. Apparently she and Dina had decided to spend their Saturday having a girls' night and wouldn't be home until the next morning. Jeannie, who'd been spending a day with a friend, decided to stay the night. Birchum slapped his flip phone shut and sighed. "You know, after a hard day's work, men need a bit of alcohol." He was offering it more because he felt he needed it. Carponzi waved Birchum off. No, I don't drink." "You sure?" Birchum asked to be polite, a lapse in judgment. He didn't need Carponzi around. He needed him gone. He needed him out of his head. Carponzi considered a moment before smiling. "You know what? I'll take you up on that drink." Birchum cursed internally. There was beer in the fridge, but he wanted something stronger. From behind Wendy's wine, he produced a bottle of whiskey. It was a gift from Don, something they'd drink together. Birchum set the bottle and 2 shot glasses on the coffee table in front of the couch where Carponzi was sitting. Carponzi picked up one of the shot glasses and examined the picture on it. "The burly man?" Birchum chuckled. "My personal hero. Those are collector's items." Carponzi nodded. "You know, I think it's wild. A TV mascot for frozen food that did so well and became so popular they made a TV show out of it. Good thing they did. It's funny as hell. Never watched it." "Seriously?" He proceeded to dust off his box DVD collection of the show and pop in a disc. He poured both of them a drink. Carponzi gave it a sniff and a little sip. Birchum knocked his back and Carponzi decided to follow suit. About halfway into the first episode, Carponzi tilted his head like a confused dog. The show took place on a ranch. There was a shower scene where a burly man, no, he was never given an actual name, and another farmhand chatted, completely nude, shot from the waist up. Both were very liberal with their physical contact. "This is extremely homoerotic," Carponzi noted. "What, 2 men can't touch each other without being gay?" "In my experience, straight men don't act." As Carponzi spoke, the second farmhand complimented burly man's muscles, slapping his chest. "Like that." Birchum bit his lip. He'd been watching this show since he was a kid. How would he not notice this? Carponzi pulled out his phone. "I have to look into this," he mused. He was a total lightweight. 3 shots in and his words were already slurring slightly. Carponzi hummed a minute later. "Grader was gay. Didn't come out until years after the show aired. But, yeah, makes a lot more sense now." He huffed. "I guess there was a lot of hate from fans when the news came out. A lot of men watched the show and didn't pick up on anything. Fascinating." Birchum drummed his fingers against the armrest of the couch. "That made a lot of sense. The show wasn't known for its female characters. It wasn't outright sexist, but they barely existed and were never the focus. The show focused solely on the interpersonal relationships between the male characters, all of whom were very, very close. He barely noticed this distinction and found that he actually preferred it. The shining beacon of manhood he idolized all throughout his youth, was obsessed with, filled the vacancy left by his father, was the creation of a gay man exerting his fantasies of men being intimate with the thin veneer of plausible deniability thrown on top. Carponzi looked over at Birchum, brow raised. "You okay?" "Just tired," Birchum muttered, knocking back another shot. Carponzi was trying to keep up with Birchum, but was so unused to alcohol he wasn't able to handle it. As Birchum got up to switch the DVDs, he noticed that Carponzi's head was lolled back, eyes closed, fast asleep. Birchum replaced the discs and approached Carponzi. He'd wake up with a nasty neck ache sleeping like that. He placed a small pillow behind his head. He could feel his cheeks flush as he touched Carponzi's head. His hair was extremely soft and smelled sweet. It was clear he used women's shampoo and conditioner. He draped a throw blanket over him, tucking in the sides, and sat back down. Carponzi shifted slightly and his head moved, slipping from the pillow, resting on Birchum's shoulder. He could feel his face grow hot. Oh god, he was trapped. There was a rustling from the kitchen before Eddie poked his head in. "Just getting something from the fridge, don't judge me." He saw the two on the couch and the somewhat helpless look on Birchum's face. He held up his hands and receded back into the kitchen. Birchum cursed under his breath. He should have just jostled Carponzi, woken him up, and sent him home. But when he saw the peaceful look on his face, he couldn't bring himself to. Carponzi this physically close, after they'd seemingly buried the hatchet and agreed to get along, after seeing that he was a real person, not the soulless SJW he used to see him as, Birchum felt that saccharine feeling rising inside again. It was intoxicating. The alcohol was making his head swim. It made the feeling less scary. It drove away the shame and the fear and allowed the pleasantness to just exist. Birchum let his head fall back against the couch and was unable to keep the little smile from spreading across his lips. Birchum woke to the front door opening and closing. He snorted and jolted upright. Wendy walked in. Her hair and makeup were a mess and she held her head. "God, why does that have to be so loud?" she murmured. She saw her husband sitting on the couch, the cheesy early 2000s DVD menu playing on loop. "Morning," he said. "There is nothing good about this morning. God, I shouldn't have let Dina talk me into going to that club. Too many drinks, too loud music. I have a bitch of a headache." She made her way to the kitchen to retrieve her stash of morning after Gatorade. Carponzi was gone. The blanket he'd been covered with and the pillow Birchum had placed behind his head were folded and stacked neatly together. A sticky note had been left on the arm of the couch. "Sorry to run off. Had to take care of my dog. Want to get coffee at the shop down the street before we start on the desk? Just come over. Door's unlocked." Carponzi's name was signed in feminine cursive, a little hard after it. Birchum simultaneously felt disappointment that Carponzi was gone, and irritation that he felt that disappointment. As per Carponzi's request, Birchum slipped into his home. "Elliot?" He was assaulted by the fragrance of scented candles. Birchum slipped off his shoes and walked into the house. It was well furnished, though he was admittedly not a fan of some of the modern art decorating the tables and walls. The sound of a hairdryer could be heard from the floor above, followed shortly by someone descending the stairs. Carponzi was freshly showered, his hair spilling past his shoulders. Birchum felt his stomach clench. His hair was gorgeous, silky and voluminous. "I've never seen you with your hair down," Birchum mused. "Yeah, the bun is just more manageable while at work." "It looks nice." "Thank you." Carponzi's smile was so genuine it made Birchum want to swoon and gag simultaneously. Carponzi drove them to a coffee shop where Birchum spent much of the time staring at the menu for fear he'd stare at Carponzi instead. "So," Carponzi said, sipping his drink once it was delivered, "I wanted to thank you." "For what? The desk? It's what I do." "Well, that, but also the blanket, the pillow. That was very sweet of you." He smiled and Birchum could see a slight twinge of heat kissing his cheeks. "Your shoulder was comfy. I'm sorry if that made you uncomfortable, though." "No!" Birchum interjected a little too quickly. "It was... whatever." Birchum knocked back his coffee as quickly as possible so they could return to work on the desk. If he was diligent, he could get it finished. He just needed to build it. Carponzi said he'd paint it himself. All Birchum needed to do was get it done, and Carponzi would be out of his hair. They were able to get the desk finished around dinner time. Birchum realized he was being a tad short with Carponzi at this point in the day, but he wanted him out. He needed time to think, to not have the man dominate his thoughts. Birchum needed to pull away. His growing feelings towards Carponzi were scaring him. He was a married man with 2 kids. He shouldn't... couldn't be thinking about him in this way. He desperately wanted the man. He wanted to be with him, be around him, hold his hand, kiss him, all the things he could freely do with Wendy but had no interest in. He hated that he'd come to understand Carponzi. It was easier when he could just write him off and pay him no mind. Now he was unable to keep himself from chatting with him in the break room. He couldn't keep himself from waving at Carponzi every morning when they let their dogs out. He struggled to hide his elation at seeing the gorgeous paint job Carponzi did on the desk they built. He was now agreeing with some of Carponzi's liberal bullshit. So much of what he espoused actually made a lot of sense. It was getting to a point where Don would try to write Carponzi off, and Birchum would shush him and let the Jedi continue. That Thursday, everything came to a head. Upon exiting the school with Don, Birchum waved at Carponzi as he waited in the car. Don let out an exasperated groan. "What the hell is your deal, Dick?" "What do you mean?" "Don't you play with me, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Ever since you started riding to work with that goon, you've been acting loony. You've been so chummy with him, you hang on every stupid word that escapes his mouth. Why? Whatever happened to common sense, to putting guys like Carponzi in their place?" Birchum recoiled slightly at the sight of Don's legitimate fury. "Look, it's nothing, okay? No, it's very much something. Something I want to know about." "Spill," Birchum floundered. "Don, what do you want me to say? We're friendly, he's a nice guy. He's not as bad as we thought." "You honestly believe what that guy says? That everything around us is a form of oppression? That you and I existing is an assault on queer people and women because we know what it's like to be real men?" "I don't think it's that simple anymore." Don's eyes lit up like the flick of a lighter, and the two proceeded to get into a very loud verbal altercation that ended with each of them storming off. Birchum yanked the passenger side door of Carponzi's door open and slammed it too hard, making him jump. He looked deeply upset. "What happened?" "Nothing. Don's just being an ass. I want to get home. I have a headache." He refused to make eye contact with Carponzi and stared out the window, though he could feel the man's puppy dog eyes on him periodically. The next day, Birchum attempted to speak to Don and clear the air, but was brushed off. Don merely said, "Don't worry about it." Birchum wanted to press further, but the look he was given made it very clear he was choosing to ignore their disagreement and move past it. No real discussion. Nothing. Just repression. God, Birchum was tired of repression. That afternoon, Carponzi entered the classroom. There was something he needed Birchum to look over. As Carponzi entered, he smiled sweetly. His leg was bent at the knee, the toes of his shoe bouncing against the floor. "What do you want?" Birchum asked. "I have something to tell you." Carponzi made a come-hither motion with his finger, tongue between his teeth. As Birchum approached, Carponzi took Birchum by the collar and pulled him close. He kissed him, holding up the clipboard as though the kids in the class would have no idea what they were doing. Birchum proceeded to throw all subtlety to the wind. He pinned Carponzi against the wall. He pressed Carponzi's hand against the wall by his head, their fingers interlaced. His wedding ring glinted in the light. He would rip that thing off, and it would be just him and Carponzi, together, alone. "Mr. Birchum?" Carponzi waved his hand, looking confused. "Oh," Birchum murmured, realizing he'd taken a journey in his mind, leaving Carponzi hanging. The kids started to snicker. A punk kid with a stripe of green hair, Davy, smirked. "Tell us you have a thing for Carponzi without telling us." The students erupted in laughter, and Birchum felt his face grow hot. The sight of his reddening cheeks made the students laugh louder. Birchum glared at Carponzi. "Outside, now!" he snapped. Upon exiting the classroom, Carponzi looked very small and fragile. I'm sorry, What happened, exactly?" "Nothing happened. What the fuck do you want?" Carponzi's timidness evaporated. "Don't speak to me in that tone. Now, what exactly is going on here? Why are you mad at me all of a sudden?" "I'm not mad. I'm just frustrated." "And what am I doing to frustrate you?" "Nothing. That's the problem. You're fine. You're perfect." Birchum's anger began to deflate. Carponzi raised an eyebrow. "So you're frustrated at me for being too perfect?" Birchum could feel everything crumbling before him. He sighed. "Carponzi, truth is, you're making me feel things. About me, about you, I don't know how to describe it." Carponzi swallowed. "What kind of feelings are we talking about here?" I'm... Birchum trailed off. "It's complicated." There was a deathly long pause before Carponzi said, "Don't tell me you're in love with me, Birchum." The wordless eye contact, the futile expression on Birchum's face, it was all the answer Carponzi needed. His own face flushed. "I'll talk to you about this later," he said, holding up the clipboard of notes before quickly striding away. Birchum stood there feeling very, very empty as the students crowded around the window and the classroom door to take in the scene. Carponzi was still kind enough to drive Birchum home, though both were dead silent the entire time. Whenever Birchum glanced in Carponzi's direction, he saw his mouth in a deep frown. Made his head spin that merely a month ago would fill him with sadistic joy. Birchum promptly went inside, grabbed a case of beer, and sat with Sawbuck on the back porch, slowly drinking himself into a stupor. He was hoping to get blackout drunk, but he was interrupted by Wendy returning home. "Uh-oh," she said, crossing her arms. "What happened?" "Work shit. Nothing important," Birchum muttered, finishing the can before promptly opening another. Wendy sighed and sat down next to him. She took a beer for herself. She took a long drink and looked out at the sky, the clouds bubblegum pink from the setting sun. "Tell me about it." "Please, when?" Wendy suddenly snapped. "Dick, for the love of God, don't when me right now, okay? Something has been off about you. I've noticed it for a while now. I know we're not exactly the most affectionate couple, but ever since your car died, ever since you started riding with Carponzi, it's like you're a different person." Birchum snorted. "Lay the 'you're not the man I married' speech on me, okay? Get it over with." "I wasn't going to. Because for your information, the man you think you married isn't here anymore." He guzzled more beer, crumpled the can, and immediately went for the next one. "I have spent my entire goddamn life trying to be what everyone wants. I did everything for my mother, my coach, my first wife, you, and at no point have I ever been fucking happy." Tears were running down his face, and he just let them roll. "I'm fucking tired. I'm 40 goddamn years old, and in all that time, I feel like the last month has been the first time I've actually lived. The first time I met someone who understands me. Someone who saw through the bullshit and made me comfortable enough to drop the act. I hate that act, Wendy." Wendy's face was unreadable. "And what act are we talking about here?" "I love you, Wendy. You know that, right? You're my family. I can't imagine living without you. Which is why what I'm about to say is going to make everything turn upside down." "What is it?" Wendy stressed. She was at the very edge of the porch step, leaned in close. "I'm not attracted to women. I never have been." Wendy blinked. She was quiet for a moment before clarifying. "You're gay?" Birchum nodded. Wendy looked like she'd been bludgeoned with a sack of bricks. "I'm gay," Birchum struggled to say it, "and I think I'm in love with Carponzi. I feel like I need him." Birchum crushed his beer, the liquid gushing over his hand. "I have single-handedly fucked up your entire life. I'm so sorry. You deserve everything. You and Jeannie deserve so much better than me. I've been lying to you for years, and I compartmentalized that shit so much I didn't even realize it. I hurt you. It's one thing if I hurt myself, but it's another to drag you and Jeannie into it. I don't want to lose either of you, but I can't keep living like this." He was full on bawling now. His face was red from both the stress and the alcohol. His speech was becoming slurred. He tried to continue, but his sentences were so distorted by his sobs, only phrases like, "I'm sorry," or "I hate that I'm like this" could be parsed. He was crying, but was filled with pure self-hatred. He loathed the man that he was. He wanted nothing more than for Wendy to scream, to slap his face, to make a scene, dramatically grab Jeannie and drive off. He expected 100 things. Wendy placing one hand on his thigh, the other turning his head to meet hers, was not one of them. Tears were in her eyes as well. "Oh God, Dick." She pulled Birchum into a tight embrace. Birchum gripped her as tight as possible. "Can't breathe, honey," Wendy said, which managed to get a little laugh from Birchum as he withdrew. There was a brief pause before she continued. "I'm sorry too. I'm sorry you felt like you had to hide who you are. For what it's worth, I don't think you were a mistake. I never will. You've treated me better than most men in my life. I've genuinely cherished my life with you. That was all very real." She curled and uncurled her hair around her forefinger as she always did when emotional. "It must have felt like you were trapped with me. It does hurt to know that you never loved me the way I loved you. Still love you like the family you are. That'll never change," Birchum said. Wendy finished her beer and reached for another. "What do we do?" she murmured. Sunday afternoon, Birchum rang Carponzi's doorbell. He answered the door dressed in his pajamas, his hair down and messy. He looked so disheveled, so normal, yet he was still the most gorgeous man Birchum had ever laid eyes on. "Birchum, can I help you?" "You look a little rough," Birchum noted. "I was just eating far too much ice cream." He shook his head. "What do you want?" "I was hoping you'd maybe take a walk with me. I have a lot I want to talk to you about." Carponzi seemed suspicious, but agreed. A few agonizing moments waiting for Carponzi to change, then the two were strolling down the sidewalk. Birchum tried burying the lead, just asking how Carponzi was doing. His answers were short and terse before suddenly exclaiming, "Okay, Birchum, let's cut the shit." It took Birchum by surprise. Carponzi rarely swore. "You're attracted to me, right?" Birchum had really hoped this conversation would play out differently. That accusatory look in Carponzi's eyes, his tone. Birchum was totally unprepared. He wasn't expecting to have to be this blunt. Yes. Felt so bizarre explaining things to Wendy last night, and it was no less strange today. Carponzi kicked a loose stone on the sidewalk. It collided against a wooden fence with a sharp crack. Good shot? Birchum offered, lamely. Finally, Carponzi spoke. I'm struggling to phrase this properly. I feel the same way. Birchum's heart leapt. Really? Carponzi nodded. It's been difficult because I knew who you were, what your situation was. I realized it was stupid. It was one-sided. So what you said Thursday, I didn't know how to handle it. I was flabbergasted. I was excited, but you're married. You have a family. I refuse to be the other woman. Birchum's heart was pounding 100 beats a minute. What if you weren't the other woman? What, you're leaving Wendy? I told her everything Friday night. Carponzi was shocked. Really? Birchum nodded. We talked a lot. All of Saturday. And we came to an agreement. I may be gay, but we don't want to separate. We love each other. We're family. We have been for so long. But what we did agree is that it's unfair for us to both be emotionally unfulfilled. We're still family, we're still married, but it's an open marriage. Both of us can be with whoever we want. And I was hoping... I was hoping that we could... Carponzi was stunned. I wouldn't have figured you two for the open marriage type. Birchum grinned. Yeah, me neither, but here we are. His smile faded. I don't know if that's something you're comfortable with. I don't know if I'm someone you would even really want. You have so much to offer, and I'm some shitty old man who's wasted his life. Carponzi stopped. Do I have consent to hold your hand? He asked. Birchum held out his hand in response, and Carponzi clasped it. You're not some shitty old man. You haven't wasted your life. You're talented, you're family forward, you're willing to grow. That's what I look for in a man. He smiled. And it sounds like you want to be my man. If you'll have me. Birchum pulled Carponzi into an embrace. Carponzi looked up at him, those beautiful blue eyes twinkling. Do I have consent to kiss you? He breathed. Birchum answered by cupping Carponzi's cheeks, tilting his head back and kissing him first. It was soft and tender. Birchum wanted to cry. This was his first real kiss. The first kiss that actually felt like something. Hopefully the first of many.